Hello,
Right.
hello.
Hi.
Let's do it. Let's do it.
All right. All right.
Hi everyone. My name is Shay Fabade, and my dear
I'm
friend here is
Raza Shirazi. Hi, everyone.
cool. We have decided to take a conversation Reza and I have been having for years now, and bring you all into our conversation. We're calling the podcast Future Forward, and it's centered around cities and the future of cities, with a good look at the past, which we both believe informs the future. So this is the Future Forward podcast, and our first episode today is the future of the office.
Yeah, great. Excited to talk about this, Shay. I mean, when I think about the office, I always want to think about like where did offices come from? Because I don't
Yeah.
think like I mean, it seems like a recent phenomenon if you think of human history. It's unusual in that sense. So maybe
It,
let's start there.
let's start there. And the interesting thing is, I thought the same until I decided, you know what? Where did this, exactly what you said? Where did this all begin? And it turns out that the first purpose-built office was the old Admiralty office, which is now known as the Ripley Building in London, which means it still exists, and it
Wow.
was built in 1726.
Okay. Well, I'm blown away. I'm already
Yeah.
wrong. I like this.
But you and I love being wrong because
Yeah,
that means we're going to learn something new. So,
yeah. So tell me
um,
more. I want to know.
yeah, so 1726, the first office, and then you get a kick out of this. The sort of the next set of offices were built by the British India
Hmm.
uh,
The East India
Company,
Company?
East India Company, yeah,
Interesting.
and further down in the 1700s. But the concept of the office as we know it today really
Mm-hmm.
picked up in New York City
Mm-hmm.
in the uh, mid 1800s, which is
Okay.
around when the elevator was invented.
Interesting. And so,
Because,
yeah,
yeah, go for it.
yeah. No, I'm just curious. Like, what were those early offices? What were
Yeah,
they?
so those early offices were few rooms, one level in a
Mm,
building, and
mm-hmm.
consequently, you couldn't hold too many people in it.
Okay.
The alternative was a factory setting, and it
Right.
meant you just dumped a bunch of people in a one
Yeah.
level place that was extended, and it looked more factory like than office like.
Mm-hmm.
And so the as buildings started adding floors, it was capped
Mm,
because you were going to have people climbing
yeah.
10 flights of stairs,
Yeah.
and there were two problems: the number of stairs and the effort people would have to put to go up and down the building, but
Yeah.
also the construction of the buildings. You needed
Yeah.
most buildings were built with outside scaffolds essentially that held
Mm,
them up, but
mm,
for tall buildings you needed uh, load bearing steel
mm.
somewhere in the middle so you could build around it.
Interesting.
So deep foundations, load bearing
Yeah.
load bearing walls, but
Yeah.
also load bearing beams in the middle of the building. So it could
Hmm.
go as high as however you
Got it.
felt you could. And um, the Otis building,
Yeah.
Elijah Otis,
Yeah.
who didn't invent elevators, because apparently Archimedes allegedly built one in 20 2200 years ago in Sicily.
Mm,
I don't know
yeah.
how true that is, but that was one of the things I found out. But Elijah Otis invented the safety lock, which
Mm.
prevented the elevators from falling,
Okay.
and then people started getting more comfortable with
mm,
going into buildings with elevators.
mm,
He demoed it at the World Fair in New York in like
mm,
1853.
mm,
And then we get the boom in New York again. No
mm.
surprises. The
So it's
boom was
almost
in New
like
York.
the rise of offices is close to the rise of skyscrapers. No pun intended there, but
Absolutely.
it's
Absolutely.
Shay, what I'm curious about is like, why did offices even come about? Like, was there this? Because I imagine there was this agrarian, like things were mostly agrarian, and then it became manufacturing. Then there's this professional class that comes about that needs
Yes.
offices.
Yes, and that
Okay.
professional class came about. You're totally correct. The professional
Yeah.
class came about because um, businessmen, business owners, and a big part of that class was
Mm-hmm.
insurance. It was
Mm-hmm.
insurance companies, and they needed a bunch of actuaries, a bunch of accountants, all in one space, handling the what we now know as data management and data
Mm-hmm.
entry and analysis
Knowledge work,
for,
the
yes,
original
knowledge
knowledge
work.
work.
Exactly. And
And using their
so
brains. They weren't like manufacturing and
they were
using
not.
their bodies, right?
They were not. And so the goal was to, and the first guy who started putting his actuaries and accountants was this guy called William LeBaron Jennings
Mm-hmm.
in Chicago. And the claim is that 1885, that was the first true official
Office.
skyscraper where you had
Mm-hmm.
all these accountants and all these bookkeepers and actuaries in one space in Chicago. Um, but the real boom was in New York City, unsurprisingly, because you had all the Rockefellers,
Mm-hmm.
the um, uh, rich magnates that we now know and speak of. Some of them
Yeah.
are still names on some of our banks.
Yeah.
Blew up with the buildings that
Yeah.
they were building to house the knowledge workers that they
Yeah.
were
Yeah.
hiring.
Hmm. Interesting. So we seem to have come a long way from there where offices now dominate. Like, right, we, you know, agricultural work makes up a tiny portion of things. Manufacturing is a
Yep.
much smaller part of the economy. We have offices
Yep.
everywhere. So, and then, that seemed like we were on a normal mode of going to the office. It seemed like drinking water and breathing air, and then the pandemic hits, and suddenly everything changes for everyone. I mean, remote work existed, but it wasn't normal.
Wasn't normal. It wasn't normal. You're correct. And the wild thing about the pandemic sort of shifting this staple we knew as office use
Mm-hmm,
actually ties back to the same guy I mentioned, the Jennings guy.
mm-hmm,
He ended up with what was about. He went from an insurance guy and a garment guy to he was a garment worker initially, and
mm-hmm,
then moved up. And then the rise of the office and the fall of the office is
mm-hmm,
actually closely tied to real estate. And that
mm-hmm.
is kind of the crazy um, connection between the past and today. Because
Okay.
Jenny's went from, oh, I'm hiring people to work in this office I built, to
Mm-hmm.
I will build offices for other businesses to put their people in. And he became a
Wow.
real estate magnate, decided to, he was worth around $100 million in the 1920s.
Whoa.
But then by 1928, he was worth $100 million. By 1932, he died with only $2,500
Holy moly. What happened?
because the real estate crash of whenever the depression was
Yeah, the
happening,
Great Depression. Yeah.
the Great Depression, which in a wild way is what we were starting to call the period at the beginning of the pandemic when
Yeah.
everything shut
Everything
down.
sucked. Yeah.
He saw it coming. Everybody who saw it coming decided to sort of back off a little, but
Mm-hmm.
Jennings decided to invest almost all his money in real
Mm.
estate because he believed people will come back into those offices.
Wild. That's kind of prescient.
It is. It is.
Yeah.
And so to bring it to today, we now find ourselves asking the questions, oh, will people go back to the office?
Yeah.
And you and I have had a few conversations like this where you
Yeah.
gain so much from collaborating
I do.
and
Yeah.
the work you do. So if you don't mind sharing a little bit more about the
Yeah.
work you do and how collaboration and face-to-face
Yeah.
time is key. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm a product manager, and I often tell other people, you can't work alone as a product manager. Like your work is with other people. It's the engineers, designers, data analysts, product marketers, and it is like you're creating something, but you're
Mm,
creating something with others,
mm,
and that creative activity is is can be hindered by not having those close relationships. Like I often
mm,
talk about product management being like jazz, and
mm.
you have to figure out how to improvise together, and all of that is like body language and knowing each other, and seeing a rectangle on Zoom just doesn't quite convey the physical presence of being somewhere. And so whenever I am in the office, with my team members, whether we have an on-site, right now I'm working remote. We do have an office in Austin, um, but occasionally we have on-sites, where the team comes in. And I had one recently where, one of the principal engineers, my designer, and I came into the office in Austin and spent a day, jamming. I'll use the
Yeah,
word jamming just like we do jazz.
in jazz.
And the reason was because we were grappling with, sort of a new capability that we were building. And it was
Mm,
just really difficult for us to thread things together over Zoom. Like
mm.
I talked to Elijah, then I talked to Nico, and then Nico would talk to Elijah. Then the three of us would talk together, but we could never quite like be in a space together where we could finish that conversation. And so I was
Yeah,
just like, okay, we're going to come together, but one day we're going to be in a room, and we got so much done
that's awesome.
together in that room. And so I have this, there's a mixed bag between, wanting to be in the office and having that type of intense connection and collaboration versus, being at home and being able to focus and get some work done. So
Yeah,
yeah,
it's and so I in my moments of recognizing the value of what you just shared, I'm 100% behind spending some days in the office.
yeah,
What I'm struggling with, and this is sort of the tying it back to Jenny's and the hubris, because
mm-hmm,
it really was hubris. There was this huge build out of commercial um, office space that after a few years we had really way too much, and any desire to have people to go into this space, even if your
yeah,
work didn't require it,
yeah,
was purely based on the real estate value and the money that had been spent to
yeah,
build those things. Um, One quick fun, maybe not so fun fact: five of New York City's 10 tallest buildings were built in the period between 1930 and 1933.
yeah,
Interestingly, the 4 or 5 years before the pandemic
mm-hmm,
saw the biggest boom in commercial real estate space
okay,
being built as well. So,
mm-hmm,
why did I mention that? Most of these things are cyclical, is
mm-hmm,
really
yeah, yeah,
the reality here. And we have all these CEOs and company owners who are forcing return to work and talking about how hybrid work is going to be the death of whatever company,
mm-hmm,
and remote working from home, when we have examples of companies that have never been in person
mm-hmm,
and they're doing good business. So
Yeah.
it's it almost suggests, and this is sort of what I think you were sharing, for collaborative communal work, maybe we do need to be in the same spaces
Hmm.
sometimes.
Hmm. And so you don't think like they're like I'm gonna push back a little. Like I
Please.
feel that we're human, right? And we actually want to be social with others. And we don't live in communities where we have enough interaction.
True.
And mm, a lot of interaction, at least my experience of, living in the US, versus growing up in India, is like, growing up there, the office wasn't the important place. It was like all these other spaces that allowed you to
Yes.
commune with others. And I
Yes.
don't feel like we have that as much in the US. And so the office became a more important place, or feels like a more important place. And then we
Eh,
retreat to the home and we're not like connected with the community to where the office is the only outlet for, your social connection. And so while I agree with you that, some businesses with this push to return to work maybe is not the best thing, um, I agree with you on that, but I disagree that we shouldn't have it. Like we should have some form of connection, and it seems in the U.S. that form of connection happens in the office. We don't. I mean, we should really fix the problem of being closer in our communities. I don't know how to fix that problem.
and I think that's totally the key, because what we've conflated, I think,
Yeah, yeah.
is the office and community.
There you go.
And
Yes.
for some of us, I moved to the US in 2008.
Yeah.
And for most of my time in the US, I haven't actually worked in the same space as the people I've worked with in whatever capacity I've worked. But you and I met
Yeah.
in a third space
Yes.
where sometimes we would work and then catch up
Yes.
and then go back to wherever we. So I do think the message of, oh, work cannot be done, or work
Mm,
cannot be done well,
mm,
and we don't have the community and the loneliness epidemic we have in our cities.
yeah.
Work was never going to solve that.
Mm, yeah.
The and you hit it on the head. The real problem isn't the spaces that we go to, it's the bonds we build,
Yeah. Yeah.
and we're not building those bonds. But I'm an optimistic realist. I
Yeah.
found a company that is building exactly that.
Tell me more.
And the company is in the Charlotte area, and the
Mm-hmm.
name is but before I get to the name of the company, what this guy, his name is Tesho Akindele, who used to be a soccer player
Hmm.
for the Orlando teams, Canadian, but played soccer for the Orlando team. And you and I always joke about
Yeah.
soccer being
Yeah. Yeah.
life.
Yes.
So it was
Yeah.
such a delight when I found Tesho Akindele's business, which is this mixed communal work office idea. And I'll
Mm,
share an image.
mm-hmm.
And but yes, he's built what is really a few acres, or he's still
Mm-hmm.
working on it, a few acres of hybrid home. And essentially you sleep in your room in one part of this warehouse
Mm-hmm.
turned facility.
Mm-hmm.
You wake up, bathe, whatever it is you do, and you can come out to some of these shared spaces where you can then eat a freshly cooked meal by
Mm-hmm.
a business from the community if you choose not
Mm-hmm.
to cook yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And then essentially another part of the space is shared workspaces and offices. So it's a more community oriented idea that blends these two problems that you and I are talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and the idea that that is possible, we can adapt the spaces we have, is where
Mm,
I think the real estate owners and the business owners who are trying to force everyone back to the office, I think that's where they should spend their energy, honestly.
mm-hmm. So, so are you saying like we have to find a way of adapting? Like there's this new normal, we need to find a way of adapting. This could be one possibility, one possible way of adapting. Um,
Yes.
I'm not convinced. It leaves
Say
me,
more. Say
yeah,
more.
it leaves me a little empty because
Say more.
I still uh, long for um, spaces that are not created to sort of artificially form community, but are organically forming community. Like, I
Mm,
don't know, churches, clubs, I don't know, places where, you know, where you feel belonging because
yes.
there's something more to that space than yourself and the people there. Like there's an identity. Like I feel that when I go to an Austin FC game, you and I have been to an Austin FC games, and
Yes. Yes.
you enter that stadium and you feel like you belong immediately, and you feel like I am part of this community. These people are here because they love this team, they love this city, um,
Yes.
and I don't know if that you can replicate that by sort of, you know, I, you know, I, I think it's great that he's trying that. I'm curious to see if it can organically create
Become.
that sense of belonging that you have in these other places. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It makes a ton of sense. The so Camp North End is the name of
Okay.
the it's called Camp North End, and I
Yeah.
think the choice of name is intentional, and I'll
Mm,
touch on. He calls it a camp because there is a recognition. My take.
yeah.
There is a recognition that this is about bringing people inorganically
Mm,
into
mm,
experiences, shared
mm,
organic experiences. So some people will hear Camp North End, see the listen to this idea of, oh, you can get food from local food places. There's a farmer's market that is
yeah.
within walking distance,
Yeah.
and say I would never do that. Why would I do that? But I think the people who would hear that will come from all walks of life, all different backgrounds, but will share exactly what you just said, Reza, this desire to belong. And if it
Mm,
works for them, it will, and they'll
yeah.
probably stay.
Yeah.
And this will expand because a married couple with 3 kids
Yeah.
can't be in a shared space like that.
No.
They still want to belong in their neighborhood, but there
Mm,
will be modifications that are more organic, I
mm,
think,
mm,
attached to this slightly inorganic beginnings of what I think is really about
mm,
building better neighborhoods.
mm,
So
mm,
I'm optimistic about the idea. I like that he used to be a soccer player because
yeah.
he's definitely thinking strategically about this, as
Yes.
you do as a soccer player. And he was a pretty good one too. He was a striker.
Okay. So he knows how
Yeah,
to move into the right spaces.
exactly.
So
He
maybe
knows how
this
to.
this bit. So Shay, here's the thing. So you know you're amazing at this. Like you know, future Sherpa, thinking of the future. Like this is a great example. So I'm curious, it's like where do you see this? Where do you see offices going?
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
what do you see on the horizon?
yeah. So I'll caveat this by saying, in most conversations I have about Houston, I don't really talk about Houston in the most glowing light.
Ah,
Interestingly
mm,
though, one of the things Houston failed to do, I don't think it was intentional. One of the things they failed to do was zone.
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
cities. And
Yeah.
consequently, you go to downtown Houston and you see everything. You
Yes.
see
Everything everywhere.
everything everywhere,
Yeah.
apartments,
Yeah.
offices.
Yeah.
And interestingly, this unzoned approach
Mm.
to downtowns is what Jane Goodall was preaching.
Mm.
It's what she was preaching, such that you
Interesting.
had everything you needed within
Every day. Yeah.
a,
Yeah.
a,
Within that neighborhood.
within that neighborhood, and
Yeah. 15
consequently
minutes or whatever.
15 minutes or so. And
Yeah.
even if you
Yeah.
lived in high rises, she didn't like high rises, but
Yeah.
the office spaces that are high rises or skyscrapers now,
Yeah.
there needs to be some conversion. This is
Yeah.
where I see the future going.
Okay.
Less zoning
Yeah.
in downtowns, or a change of some of the zoning laws in downtowns that are office space dense, to
Mm.
convert them into mixed use. And we will live, eat, hang out, engage with our neighbors,
Yeah.
all within these downtown areas that used to be purely office spaces but are
Mm.
dying now. I really think so. I was talking to a friend, and I asked him, I was like, what would you, he just had a baby. I was like, what do you want? He lives downtown
Mm-hmm.
in one, sorry, he lives outside of downtown, but works downtown in one of the major cities in the US. His wife works, he works, and they have this lovely little 7 month old girl.
Mm-hmm.
And he goes, and I was sort of telling him what I think the future. He goes, dude, if someone, and I'm not saying this just for myself, this was him, if someone could build or convert some of these downtown skyscrapers that are currently offices and no one is coming into them,
Mm-hmm.
into spaces where my wife and I live on like the 20th floor.
Mm.
We drop our kid at the daycare that is on the first floor. We
Yeah.
walk 5 minutes to our offices that are in opposite distances. Then we come to our building for lunch at the restaurant on the fourth
Mm-hmm.
floor with our
Mm-hmm.
daughter. We
Mm.
drop her back at the
Amazing.
daycare. We go back to the office, walk back home, and have dinner or watch movies on the eighth floor movie theater together.
Yeah.
I will pay whatever amount they will ask me for,
Mm.
because I don't want to own a home in the
Yeah.
suburbs.
Yeah.
I don't like driving. And we've
Yeah.
talked about the fact most of the next generation aren't getting their driver's licenses,
Yeah.
but they still want to live vibrant lives. So, long way of saying, I do think adaptive reuse of the centers of our cities to enable the shared community, belonging, and just fulfillment that we all desire is
Mm.
going to be the way. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. Like if we sort of circle back to where we started, where, you know, these offices were created for a purpose of, concentrating work into an area. And then they just sort of mushroomed into becoming a way of solving a problem, but we forgot like how we want to retain our humanity and be close to
Yes.
others, and not this weird way of living where downtowns are offices and suburbs are where we live. And so his wish, yeah, I'm curious, like, I'm sure we'll talk about this again, Shay, but
Yes.
you know his wish is probably a wish that others have. Um,
Yeah. I
and
truly,
and I wonder, like, you know I'm certain, like, we will probably talk about this in a future episode, but being in that area of walking around and bumping into others and all the serendipity of, you know being connected to others as opposed to sitting in cars and, not
yeah. Yeah.
uh you know how 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 will our communities thrive even more,
When that
would
happens,
that happen? Yeah.
I know the thread for you is always community, and as long as I've known you, that desire for not just for yourself, but for our cities
Yeah.
has been like core to your work, to your engagement, to your community building. And I genuinely believe there are more people that are starting to want the same thing, especially
Yeah.
after the pandemic and what it showed us about how
Yes. Yes.
separated and lonely we are.
Yes. How disconnected
Yeah, how
and how
disconnected we
difficult
are.
that was. How
Yes,
difficult that
yes,
was.
yes. And the
Um,
beauty of that time for me, if we can find any beauty, is you and I would constantly
yeah.
engage.
Yeah.
And what what a beautiful world, or what beautiful cities we would have if
Yes.
that experience of us making sure we set aside time to connect outside a coffee shop is
Yes.
one everybody can have,
Yeah.
because they're not having to drive miles
Yes.
away to go to work somewhere. I truly
Yeah.
believe that's the future of our cities.
Yeah. Yeah. I love it. Shay's been great.
Awesome.
This is so good talking about this. I feel like we have so many more topics to explore. I can't wait to do
Absolutely.
it. I can't wait for uh, all the good conversations we have. Would love to hear from our listeners about what they want to hear from us,
Yes.
questions that they have for us. We'll find
Yes.
a way of having all of you engage with us and share your ideas. We clearly don't know everything. We have some opinions.
Absolutely not.
We can't wait to learn more, not just from each
Yes.
other, but from all of you that are listening. So yeah, I'm excited we've started this, Shay, and I can't wait for us to do more.
Same. This is awesome, Reza. Thank you.
Thanks everyone.